And we are live. Welcome to another edition of DT Live. I hope everyone is having a lovely morning or afternoon or evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. For those of you that are already hanging out in the YouTube chat, quick audio check, give me a yay or a nay on the audio. Can you actually hear me? Looks like we have about 30 or 40 of you guys already in the chat. I'm going to preview the stream just very briefly myself. It looks like I do have working audio. All right, guys. Yay, I appreciate that. Hello from Sweden, I can hear you. All right, guys, thanks. Just making sure. So the subject of today's stream, of course, you probably can tell by the thumbnail and the title, I'm going to be revisiting Doom Emacs today. So I'm going to basically run through a quick installation of Doom Emacs, run through some of the basics. For those of you that are thinking about trying out Doom Emacs, maybe you're a Vim user, and you've been wanting to get into Emacs, and a really easy way to get into Emacs if you're a Vim user, you're already familiar with the Vim bindings and everything, is to use a distribution of Emacs such as Doom Emacs, which already has Evil Mode installed. Evil Mode is essentially emulating Vim key bindings inside Emacs. All right, yeah, so lots of yays on the audio. All right. Yeah, Sweden hears me, Puerto Rico hears me, Melbourne hears me, Bangladesh hears me. All right. Got quite a global audience today, which is always, you know, fun to, like, as a content creator on YouTube, you know, when I check my analytics, I actually almost never check my analytics. It's probably been months since I checked all that stuff. But, you know, you can go in and see as far as like the demographic of your audience. One of the things with tech content is it's almost always, like, overwhelmingly a male audience. It's like 97, 98% male. But it is interesting as far as the breakdown by country. Because the largest, I guess, by percentage is the US audience, but it's just barely like the largest audience. We have a huge following, for example, in India, China, Europe. I know we got a lot of UK, a lot of Germany, and obviously we've got Sweden, Switzerland. That's another one that often shows up in my analytics. Yeah, hello from Indonesia. All right. Yeah, I hope you do Linux from scratch. Yeah, that would be such a bad stream. It would be a very lengthy stream. And really, you couldn't do it on one stream. It would be very tough to do it all in one stream. It would be hours and hours of just sitting here compiling. And that's not educational, right? Like, enter a command. All right, now we sit for 2 hours while it compiles. You know, that's, you know, I like Gentoo is the same. You know, Gentoo, of course, is a source-based Linux distribution, and doing that on a live stream, doing that kind of content on a live stream, is not interesting kind of content. I would never watch that myself. Since I would never watch it, I don't want to actually make that kind of content either. A lot of people like that kind of content because they think it's going to be a train wreck. Like, if you think the content creator, for whatever reason, can't get through, you know, a Linux from scratch install or a Gentoo install or even Arch Linux install, like if they're doing the command line Arch Linux installation, a lot of people tune in just basically hoping that that guy makes a mistake. But, you know, I'm pretty good at reading wikis and installation guides. You know, I've never really had a problem installing any Linux distribution. Well, I won't say I've never had a problem installing Linux distributions. I've had some, obviously. I've installed hundreds of different Linux distributions over the years. And of course, some of the installations do fail, but that's usually due to the fact that, you know, some, especially smaller distributions, are buggy, or were broken, or I downloaded an old ISO, things like that. If it's a distribution, like a well-known distribution that should work, things like Arch or Gen 2 or Slackware and things like that, NixOS is another one. Although NixOS is, quite easy to install. Now they actually have a proper GUI installer, but back in the day, many years ago, NixOS was a beast to get installed. But I've always been able to get those things installed. GNU Geeks is another one. A little tough if you're new to it. But if they have proper documentation, there's really nothing to it. You just read and enter the commands, right? It's really dead simple for really all those distributions. You just have to read. I'm getting a super chat here from 3LOC. Hey DT, I'm working on a project. I guess this week that brings a which key like pop-up menu for user key cords to X11 and Wayland. I've got video demos on my page. I think you might find it useful. Thanks. Okay, appreciate that. Yeah, I do like the which key functionality inside Emacs, and I wish I did have that kind of functionality in my desktop environment or window manager. So I'm sure that you're going to find a lot of people using that thing. If it works as expected. Yeah, that 404 nerd says, it's been quite some time since I watched your videos. Used to watch them in the lockdown. Yeah, well, thankfully we're well past that now. You pretty much made me mess with Linux like a lot, man. Well, hope your Linux journey has been a good one. So the subject of today's video is Doom Emacs. So those of you wanting to follow along with me, you can run through an installation while I run through it on this stream. Just enter the commands. I'm going to cover a lot of the general key bindings, some of the most important key bindings you need to know as soon as you get into Doom Emacs. So you can follow along with this. The first thing you need to do, and this only applies if you already have an Emacs config. Make sure that you don't have a .emacs.d directory in your home directory already. Make sure you don't have a .emacs file or a config/Emacs directory. All the directories where a Emacs config can live. If you already have an existing config, either get rid of it or rename it. I'm going to rename this directory here. .config/Emacs will be .config/Emacs.bac for backup. Because the Doom install will create a new .config/Emacs directory. So I needed to move my existing config. While I'm at it, let me go ahead and kill all Emacs because I've got the Emacs daemon already running. So let's go ahead and kill that because we're going to have a new Emacs here in a minute. So the very first thing I want to do, I'm going to click the install button here, or the link. By the way, I actually should link to the GitHub for Doom Emacs. That way you guys don't have to do a search for it. So that is the GitHub. I just pasted in the YouTube chat. Click the link for install, and you need to enter these two lines in a terminal. This first line here, git clone, just clones this repository. I'm going to clone this repository into .config/Emacs. That's why I needed to move that directory, because it's going to create its own version of that directory. So let me open a terminal. I'm just going to copy and paste that git clone command. And it says fatal destination .config/Emacs already exists. I'm pretty sure I moved it. Yeah, probably when I killed the Emacs server, it tried to create it again. So let me make sure I got rid of it that time. And now let me up arrow and rerun that git clone command. And now it cloned that directory. And now I need to run this second line here, which runs this command here, .config/Emacs/bin/doom. So it's a binary, it's a script. Space install. So run the install function within that script. And I'm going to hit that, and it's going to run through an installation of Doom Emacs. Let me move the terminal over so you can see. It's asking me, do I want to create a env-var file, an environment variable file? I don't know if that's actually important or not. I'm going to choose Y for yes. I know on some operating systems it might be important, possibly on Mac OS. By the way, Emacs, of course, is cross-platform software. It does run on Windows, Mac, and Linux, which is one of the beauties of both Vim and Emacs, is actually they do work on Windows. I have actually used both Vim and Emacs on Windows machines. Now, to be fair, they work better on Linux, right? Everything runs better on Linux for the most part. And, you know, Vim and Emacs are no exceptions, but I mean, they run fine on Windows. So this installation process, you know, once you enter those two commands, it's going to start building all the modules for Doom Emacs. Basically what Doom Emacs is, it's this distribution of Emacs. It's its own framework. What it does is, you know, Emacs has a package management system. It has a package manager, and you install these packages within Emacs, these Emacs packages. You can think of them as plugins or extensions or whatever, but they're like a proper package manager. Doom Emacs goes and grabs those things, starts building all those packages that are part of the default installation. Now we can later get into the config and remove some stuff we don't want from the config or add new stuff to the config. But that installation probably will take about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I haven't run through a Doom Emacs installation in a while, but it's going to take a few minutes. Oh, back to the chat. Theo says, what I miss in Emacs is something like Telescope, which I find very useful in NeoVim. I would bet Emacs probably has something similar. It's rare you find something, any kind of plugin or extension you can imagine. It's somebody probably has created in Emacs. It's rare I ever, you know, like sit around and think, man, I wish Emacs has this. And then I do a quick Google search and it's like, oh, somebody already wrote it. So, let's see. Linux is the best, and Emacs also. I would agree. As you said, it's really important for the environment variable. That's from user. Well, I chose yes. Yes, I think was the default answer. There's going to be some other yes or no questions that come up during the installation. Once it gets near the end, there's going to be one or two more yes or no questions. And generally speaking, just answer yes to everything. Unless you have a reason to answer no, if you didn't know what the question is about, just answer yes to everything. Let's see. Something is wrong on my side. Others are having no problems with it. I tried using i3 and Hyperland, so I'm assuming that's your let's see. Having some problems with his window manager, I guess. Or window managers. He's mentions both i3 and Hyperland. One's a X11 window manager, one's a Wayland window manager. Oh, and BTD says something about Hyperland. Hey, no issues. Are you on NVIDIA or AMD? Yeah, I mean, graphics drivers are going to play a big role, especially with issues. Well, actually, issues with both X11 and Wayland. A lot of those issues will depend on what kind of graphics card you're using, what driver you're using for that card. And you can see the packages are still building. Building a lot of evil packages. You're going to see a lot of packages prepended with the name evil. That's evil mode, which is Emacs VI mode, essentially. It's the Emacs VI or Vim emulation. It essentially means that pretty much every key binding you can do in Vim works in Emacs and does pretty much the same thing. Like 99% of the key bindings and things you do in Vim, they actually work really well with evil in Emacs. You may find an occasional, like really niche thing that you can do in Vim that's doesn't have the same functionality, or it hasn't been ported to evil yet. But for the most part, it's very rare I ever come across something that I know I could do in Vim, and I hit the key binding or whatever, and it doesn't do that same thing in Emacs. It's really, really rare. see. Thanks, DT. I couldn't fit it in the message, but I appreciate your videos a lot. You got me to check out Doom, and I'm glad I did. Emacs in general is amazing. Yeah, I can't imagine ever, using a different text editor. Of course, Emacs, of course, is much more than a text editor, but I would agree, just as, its own environment, development environment, a text editor, whatever you want to call it, operating. It's practically its own operating system, right? It has, package manager and installs these packages, and Emacs is really just a fantastic piece of software. Partly just because of the way it's designed. Emacs, of course, is its own interpreter, its own language, right? Emacs Lisp, and this Emacs is really the Emacs Lisp interpreter to interpret the language. So anything you write in Emacs Lisp is interpreted by Emacs, right? Basically meaning anything you write in that particular program is an Emacs program. Anything you can imagine and write in that particular language can be something that runs in an Emacs buffer. So it makes it, extremely flexible and customizable. Wolfgang, hey DT, I learned a lot from you. I appreciate that. And then Mister says, yes, Emacs can emulate Vim, but Vim can't emulate Emacs. Emacs is more powerful. Well, Vim can't emulate Emacs in the same way, because Vim, if we're actually just talking about the standard Vim and the standard Emacs, Emacs is a GUI program, and Vim has to run in a terminal, right? It's a terminal-based application. So Vim has some limitations in the fact that it has to run inside another program. It has to run inside a terminal emulator. So it is constrained a little bit by what it can do, because not all terminal emulators are the same, for example. Obviously, Vim in a TTY is not the same Vim as in a proper terminal emulator inside Xorg or Wayland. Like if you were running Vim in Alacrity, that's a much nicer Vim than Vim in the TTY, for example, right? So that's really the biggest difference between the two is that Emacs is actually a graphical program. It's a GUI program. It can display variable font sizes. It can display images. It can display buttons, like GTK buttons. You can actually compile Emacs with, like GTK toolbars and things like that if you wanted. Generally, once you're comfortable with Emacs, though, everybody usually just runs it without any kind of toolbars and status bars and buttons. Usually they just want a plain window that's just a single frame. By the way, the Doom Emacs installation did complete. I did notice it never asked me any more yes or no questions. I know previously when I ran through the installation, it always asked me like 2 or 3 different yes or no questions. I guess now they probably just have a default setting and they just probably answer yes to everything without me needing to. So Doom should be installed. Can you hyperlink between files inside Emacs? Of course, yeah. You just write a link using file : as the prefix. I can show you that once we get into Emacs here in a little bit. But first, let's actually see if Doom Emacs actually installed correctly. So I'm going to switch to a different screen. The first thing I'm going to do, let me open a terminal. So I like running Emacs as a client-server relationship. So I like having Emacs, the server, running. So I'm going to type in the terminal /user/bin/Emacs. That's just the full path to the Emacs binary on my system. And then space --daemon. So it's going to run Emacs as a daemon, as a server. And then the ampersand behind it, meaning run that process in the background. That way I can kill this terminal window when I need to. And now I do get a yes or no question. Emoji images are not available. Should I download them? So that's a message really from Doom Emacs, because there's still some things that need to install. So let me answer why to that if it'll allow me. And I believe it did start the server. So now let me hit my key binding to launch Emacs. For those of you launching it from a menu system, look for Emacs in your start menu, if you will. Or look for Emacs client, if you have a link to that as well, if you're doing Emacs as a server-client relationship. But Doom Emacs does, in fact, launch. So it looks like I have two different windows here. Oh, went to the wrong workspace. So if I do Meta X, which is Alt X on the keyboard, it looks like, well, interesting. I thought by default the Meta X, right? You're essentially the prompt to run commands. It used to be at the bottom of the screen by default, but they've moved it as a center frame. I actually quite like that. That's a nice little touch. If I do a search for dashboard, because usually I want to see their dashboard because they have key bindings as part of their dash. But it doesn't launch the dash by default. Maybe if I kill Emacs and restart the daemon now. Yeah, it's still asking me about those emoji images. Now it's complaining about an error. Let me close that frame. You know what? Why don't we go to the Emacs config? So I believe the default key binding for find file is space. How about space F? Yeah, space FF. So you can think of it as space is the prefix key, the leader key for all the Doom Emacs key bindings. They prepend everything with space, and then they had space FF for space find file, but there's a command you could run. You could actually do Alt X, Meta X, and then type find dash file. That's an Emacs command, an Emacs program, but they have it key binding. And then I'm going to go ahead and navigate to .config/Emacs. And why did it not take me there? Why am I still in the scratch buffer? Something is not quite right here. Let me go into .config/doom because that directory exists. It says symbols function is devoid. So it doesn't, okay. Now here is where sometimes you have to debug things. When you do things, especially in terminals, you're entering commands, or you're brand new to something, like maybe you're brand new to Emacs, or in this case, Doom Emacs. You're getting an error. What is the error? Remember in the terminal when I started the server, it was asking me about emojis and about downloading things. Now I'm getting this error. Symbols function definition is void. All the icons, dear ed mode. There's an icon pack or an emoji pack, or maybe both, that I need to install. So I wonder, I just do a Meta X and then type icon install. I'm just searching for a function about installing fonts or installing emojis, and you can see nerd icons install fonts. That function, I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on that, and it says this will download and install fonts. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes or no? Y for yes. It downloaded that font package, and now let me kill that window. But again, because I was using the server, I'm going to kill Emacs, the server, restart it. Now, when I run Doom Emacs, I don't get an error, at least that time. Space FF for find file. And I'm just going to hit enter on my home directory to see if I can get into a dear ed buffer. I can't, because it still has a problem with all the icons, dear ed mode. Well, let me Meta X all the icons. I was wondering, all the icons, not just icons. What is going on? I wonder. Yeah, it's something with the icon pack. That's definitely the problem. I see you guys got some suggestions. Nerd icons install fonts. Yeah, I just did that. The terminal said into the font when you tried to type yes. There is no all the icons anymore. I wonder if I went into the documentation. I don't need this terminal open, so we're back on their GitHub. Let's go into the documentation. Let's see, troubleshoot. Surely I wouldn't be the only one to have this problem, because it's a brand new installation, right? I really haven't done anything. Could be prerequisites, dependencies, but I already have Git installed. I have GNU Find. I don't have Rip Grip installed, I don't think, but I won't really need it. Nah, that's a minor dependency. Let me do a search for all the icons. Oh, look at this. There is this commit here where they replace all the icons with nerd icons. Okay. But apparently something is still wanting the nerd icons, or the, excuse me, all the icons. Do you still have your old Doom config? Yes, I could go grab it, but here's the thing, that config, you know, is more than a year old. And if they've made some changes, like with these icons, that config would probably be broken, is my guess. What I could do, if I could get into one of the config files, I was actually looking for a dired buffer, but I know the path to the init.el. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find file, so space ff, or you could do metax find file, but find file .config/doom/init.el. See, what do they have as far as zooming in on text? Not sure what their default zoom is. I could do it with the mouse, though. I could use the scroll wheel of the mouse and zoom in. That works until I figure out what key binding they have set by default on that. But now let me search for all the icons. Well, they're not here. There's dired plus icons, iBuffer plus icons. But I believe, according to the commit, that is defaulting to nerd icons now. Say control plus and control minus, okay. But that is not working. Control minus does nothing for me. Yeah, because that's what I would have thought would be the defaults. Yeah, we're not going to get very far if I can't even like get into the file manager. What I could do, I could just get rid of the plus icons on some of this stuff. So I'm going to write that, you know, :W, just like in Vim, right? The evil mode in Emacs. So :W to write that, and I believe it's space HRR to restart. No, it's not. Well, let me do a meta X and restart. Doom restart. Space Q capital R now. And then it killed Emacs. So let me make sure it really killed the server. It did not, but I killed it. Now let me restart the server. It's complaining about an error. About some key sequence. It's very weird I'm getting these errors on a fresh installation. Very strange. Now space FF, if I try to go to the home directory, it still won't let me get into dired. I do meta X dired. It takes me to a dired buffer, but it's a blank buffer, an empty buffer. It's very, very weird. I go into my GUI file manager. Let me just make sure. This new Emacs directory, which is where Doom Emacs installed all the modules and everything. Then there's this Doom directory, which is the actual configs themselves. You know what? I wonder if this Doom directory is an old directory that I already had here. I bet it is. Let me delete that directory. And now it's going to complain because I don't have any configs. Emacs doesn't like it when you don't have a config. So what I actually need to do, I think I need to start all over. I did not realize I had that Doom directory there, because I definitely have not used Doom Emacs since I've last reinstalled a fresh installation of Arco Linux on this machine. But for whatever reason, I still had a Doom directory in my .config directory. So what I need to do, I already deleted the Doom directory. I'm going to delete that Emacs directory that it had already created, and let's rerun the installation. So first, let's git clone that directory, and then let's run through the Doom install again. Yeah, the face cam is frozen. Yeah, probably because of me killing all of those Emacs servers. I don't know. Something strange happened to the camera here. Let's see. Wonder if I can get the camera working without me having to start and stop the stream. This is a new problem as well. You gotta love live streams. I could stop the stream very briefly and restart OBS. Don't go anywhere, guys. The stream will be paused for about 20 seconds or so, just long enough for me to stop OBS, restart it, stop, and then start. All right, guys, I should be back. The second installation of Doom Emacs is running. Hopefully this installation will go a lot better. So the first 30 minutes of this stream with all the problems, that was because, again, there was an old config file, and I knew that having an old Emacs config file was going to cause problems. I've done these installations enough, but I didn't realize for whatever reason, I don't know why I still had a Doom Emacs config on this machine, because again, I did a fresh install just 3 or 4 months ago on this machine. I haven't used Doom Emacs in probably a year, but it's probably me managing some of my dot files, like over on my GitLab. It probably pulled in some of those old Doom configs, even though I haven't been using them. And having those old Doom configs causes a problem. So, but just to recap, for those that are wondering what the problem was, make sure in your home directory, make sure there is not a .emacs.d directory. There is not in my home directory. But these days, they use the more standard XDG compliant directory, which is .config/Emacs. So make sure, before starting the Doom Emacs installation, if that directory exists, delete it or back it up if you've got config files you want to save. Make sure .config/Doom doesn't already exist. Again, back it up or delete it if you're not worried about whatever configs are already there. So that was, all the problems we had before. That was all my fault, just having that config in that directory. An old config that just doesn't work with the latest version of Doom Emacs. Because they've changed those fonts from all the icon fonts to nerd fonts, my config has a lot of instances where it actually uses all the icon fonts. That old config did. So that was the issue. Now we finished the Doom Emacs installation. So let me kill the server in case it's running. Let me restart the server. It starts just fine. No errors this time. I bet when I launch Doom Emacs, it'll just work now, and it does. Also, the zoom in and out with Control plus and Control minus actually works, so that was part of the reason why some of the key bindings weren't working as well. So, this is what Doom Emacs looks out of the box. Again, if you don't screw up like I did in the beginning, you get a dashboard here at the beginning, which is just this ASCII art. It says Doom Emacs, but it does include some very helpful key bindings to get started. Space FR is your recent files. So space FR would show a list of recent files I've opened, but this is the very first time I'm doing this. There are no recent files. I haven't opened anything yet. Space FF again is the find file command, and it is down here at the bottom of the screen instead of a floating window in the center. So yeah, you know, everything I saw before was not right. So and that was very strange what was going on before, but this is the Doom Emacs that I remember. So very first thing you need to know with Doom Emacs, space is the projectile key binding. It's initializing. So that would be your project directories, project directories. So think of things like Git directories. Space period. Well, space period is not working. Space FR. Nothing is working because it's initializing cache for my home directory. Please stop. Please don't do that. Control G would kill that. That's just a standard Emacs key binding. When all else fails, try Control G. A lot of times it'll stop whatever process is going on. But space period is find file. Space FF is find file. You could use either one. That's what I thought the default find file key bindings were. Typically what I use is space period because I find that is very easy to hit. So space period, find file. Let's navigate to .config/doom. You do have a .config/Emacs directory. You should never go into that and play with it because with Doom Emacs, the actual config files that you should edit are in .config/doom. The .config/Emacs directory has all the builds of the packages that the package manager builds. You should never need to go play with that. So inside .config/doom, if I zoom in again, I'll use the scroll wheel to zoom in, but Control plus and Control minus should work now. Yeah, Control plus, Control minus. The very first config file you want to play with is the init.el. And I got to zoom in again because I only zoomed in one buffer. You know, Emacs, every time you go to a different document or to a different program that's running their own buffer. So if you zoom in one buffer, you're not zoomed in the next buffer you go to, which is kind of a neat feature, right? So the Doom init.el, this is where all the default modules for Doom are. It's this list of all these default modules. Now, the ones that are commented out begin with the 2 semicolons. So these are things that are not in use. So right now, we have not enabled, for example, Chinese support or Japanese language support. Completion framework, they use Company and Vertigo by default. If you wanted to, you could comment those out and use something else, like if you wanted to use Ivy, for example. I'm just going to leave all the defaults for now. UI, we have Doom and Doom dashboard. So what Doom is, you can see this is what makes Doom look the way it is. So probably things like the fonts and themes and things like that. The dashboard is, of course, that home screen when you first launched Doom that gave you the ASCII art and a few suggestions as far as key bindings. Doom quit is commented out. That's Doom quit message prompts. Yeah, I don't like being prompted if I'm trying to quit out of something, so I probably leave that off. The mode line is your bottom status bar. This is called the mode line in Emacs. Displays some important information. If you didn't want to use that mode line, you could turn it off. You could turn off Doom's mode line and maybe, you know, create your own if you wanted to. Probably one of the things I want to turn on. So I do use the terminals that are built into Emacs. I do want the eShell, of course. And I do want vterm. Vterm is like a proper terminal emulator, but it's, you know, inside Emacs. Now vterm has to compile. So, you know, now that I've changed this, matter of fact, now that I've uncommented these, I know vterm is a package that has to get installed. let me do, is it space HRR to restart? It does. You see we get this terminal in a split, and you can see it's building vterm. So it's going out to the package manager, pulling in vterm, building it. Also, it's installing some eShell related plugins as well to make our eShell experience, you know, nice. Basically, Doom Emacs, you know, it's a list of packages, but it's also a list of configurations for all these packages as well. They make some, you know, sensible kind of defaults as you know. They go out and find everything that most people probably would make changes with, and they just put it all, you know, in this framework that is Doom Emacs. Otherwise, you know, if you were installing just plain vanilla GNU Emacs, you know, you've got to spend some time installing a lot of packages and then configuring a lot of packages, you know, and they just, you know, have streamlined the process quite a bit for you. And you got these tools that you could enable if you wanted some of this stuff. For now, I'm just going to leave all of that stuff off. One thing I do want to get into, languages. So what languages do you want supported? Emacs by default, of course, supports Emacs Lisp, should support Markdown and org, which it does, and shell. Yeah. So if you open up like a bash script, you know, you're going to get nice syntax highlighting and everything, but you may want to turn on some other things. For example, you know, probably most of you guys play with Python on occasion. Go ahead and enable Python support. You know, when I open up my awesome window manager config, which is written in Lua, I'd like nice syntax highlighting. And you guys know my favorite programming language to mess around with is Haskell. So let me go ahead and enable Haskell. You know, we'll just go with those for now. So I'm going to escape :W to write, the same write command that's in Vim, right? So, and then the key binding to restart is space HRR. If you didn't know that, you could do meta X and look for restart, and it is Doom restart or Doom restart and restore. Either one of those. I'm going to do the key binding space HRR. Once again, we get a terminal split. Going to install a bunch of stuff because it's going to install all the language support stuff for Python, Haskell, and Lua. I'm just going to let that run for a few seconds. Get back to the chat. Let's see. DT, do you have a favorite font for code? Mine is Menlo Regular. I don't really have a favorite. I switch between a few different things. I actually really like Ubuntu Mono, because I find that very easy on the eyes, very easy to read. I like Source Code Pro is a good one. The Hack fonts, which is a standard font you'll find in pretty much every distribution's repos. Hack is pretty good as well. Yeah, JetBrains Mono, that's another really good one I've used in the past. Mononoke is another one I really like. Mononoke. All of those I find are pretty readable. Like, you know, if you get into some of the weirder monospace fonts that are more stylized, they can be a little harder to read, especially if the font size is really small, if you're not really zoomed in. All right, so the terminal split went away, so the installation has completed. So now if I navigated, for example, to a Python file, I should have nice syntax highlighting. So space FF for find file or space period for find file, either one would have worked. Now let me navigate to .config/qtile/config.py. And you can see nice syntax highlighting in our Python documents. Now, let me go back to the previous buffer. Remember, everything you open in Emacs is in a buffer. And these buffers, unless you kill them, these buffers remain open. So what buffers do I have open right now in Emacs? Well, I have this buffer, my qtile config. I also have that init.el, the Doom init.el that I was just on. It's still open as a buffer. Remember, we started on the dashboard, the dashboard screen. That's still an open buffer, so I can navigate to any of those. If I do, I believe they're doing space B for buffer. Yeah, if I just do space B, and then we get the which key select suggestions here. So which key is the split that gives me the next possible keys for a key binding. And for previous buffer, it's space BP. So B. Space BP for space buffer previous. If I want to go to the next buffer, it was space BN for next. Space BP for previous. Space BP for previous, which was a DIRED buffer. I forgot we went into DIRED, so we had that DIRED buffer still open. Space BN for next. If you want a list of all your open buffers, they use a program, I believe, called iBuffer by default. Yeah, they have that key binded to space BI. You could do meta-x iBuffer or just type space BI, and you get into this program, which is iBuffer, which lists your open buffers. You could kill buffers from here. You could switch between buffers from here. I actually don't use iBuffer that often. It could be useful if you end up in a situation where you have dozens or even hundreds of buffers open, because many Emacs users do that. Or they won't kill their Emacs server, for example, for days or even weeks at a time. And if you're constantly switching between different files, you could have literally hundreds of buffers open at a time. I never get in a situation like that, partly because I run Arco Linux, which is the Arch Linux based distribution. And you're probably wondering, well, what does that have to do with your Emacs buffers as far as the list not getting very big? Well, it's a rolling release distribution. You know, probably at least once a week, I have to take a massive update of a lot of packages, including a kernel update. And I have to reboot my machine, right? So it's different on a distribution like Arch Linux, where you do have to reboot the machine on a pretty regular basis, where if you're on a stable, old, crusty distribution like Debian Stable, for example, you could have a Emacs server that's been up and running for months, if you, in some situations. Going through more of the init.el, I mean, again, this is just a list of the default modules that are available in Doom Emacs. You can turn off the ones that are already on, or enable some of the ones that they offer. Let's see. EMMS is the multimedia player. So if you wanted to enable that, it's a music player essentially, right? So you've got all kinds of things. If you wanted to enable IRC, that would install probably the ERC package, which is Emacs IRC client. If you prefer to write your config file, your personal Emacs config file, you instead of writing it in Emacs Lisp, if you wanted it to be a org document, a literate org document, you could turn this on, literate. Let me write that, space HRR to restart. It says failed to reload your config. So I don't have an actual org document available right now, because I haven't written a literate config, so let me turn that back off. I actually do have a literate config if I wanted to go grab one. But if you wanted to, you could actually write your personal Emacs config file in org. By default, your Emacs config is config.el. That is your Emacs config, which of course is written in Emacs Lisp. All this at the top, it's a lot of documentation. You can see it's all commented lines. Anything that begins with 2 semicolons, that's a comment in Emacs Lisp. Load theme, set Q, Doom theme, Doom 1. So set Q is basically assigning a value to a variable in Emacs Lisp. So Doom-theme is a variable. What are we assigning that? As what value are we assigning that to? Doom 1. We're setting the theme to Doom 1. If I do meta-x and search for themes, load theme, you can see space HT. So space HT, and you get a list of a bunch of themes that are available out of the box here in Doom Emacs. Oh, and if you stay on one long enough, it'll give you a preview without you actually setting it. That's very cool. So if I wanted to, for example, change to Pale Night as my theme, I could do that. But here's the thing. The next time I kill the Emacs server and restart the Emacs server and load Doom Emacs, what's going to be my theme? Well, my theme is going to be Doom 1 because in my config file, I specify when Doom Emacs launches, I want the theme to be Doom 1. So if I wanted that to actually be permanent, I would have to change that in the config file to make sure that that is always my theme. Some other things here, set queue display line numbers is set to true. Line numbers, of course, is the sidebar here. That's why we get line numbers. For whatever reason you don't like having line numbers displayed, instead of T for true, you can set that to nil for false. Inside Emacs Lisp, anytime you need to do something true or false, so if it's you're setting a binary value to something, you know, it's T or nil, true or false. Or I believe it would also accept 1 for true and anything other than 1 pretty much for false, like -1. We could actually try that in action. Set that to -1. I'm going to open a terminal, kill the server, restart the server, relaunch Doom Emacs. It's using the pale night color scheme. Let me space period, find file, and let's navigate. Actually, instead of that, remember find recent file? It tells us right here, space FR for find recent files, space FR. One of my recent files is my config.el. Let me just hit enter on it. And the -1 value did not work there. So maybe it does need to be T or nil. Let's try that one more time. Restart the server. Space FR, get back into config.el, and now, yeah, those line numbers went away. And of course, just because you set something to true or false, you can always turn on and off different things by just using the commands. So do meta X and then type the command. For example, display, that's really small font, display line numbers mode. I hit enter, it's disabled. Meta X, display line numbers mode again, it's enabled. They're probably using their own custom line number function. Line number mode, disabled. They got a couple of different line number modes. Of course, I could always just turn it back on here. I was going to try to restart here. Thought it would do a hot reload. Doom reload. Space HRR, that's what I did. I'm sure there's a key binding. I just don't know it. I'll just restart the server. Eval the scratch buffer is a nice way to test these things out. Yeah, try to set it to relative. Yeah, I mean, you can set the line numbers to relative. So space FR, let me go back into the config.el. Anyway, this is your config file. So there's 3 main Doom Emacs config files. Let me do Control W-V for vertical split. Control W-V for vertical split. That's a standard Vim key binding, right? That's how you manage splits in Vim. Control W for control window. Control W-V for vertical. Control W-S for a horizontal split. Control W-C to close a split. Anyway, I just wanted a different split here. And in this frame, let me do Control W-W to move the cursor over there. Space period for find file. I'm just going to open this in a dir buffer, this directory. So you have 3 config files in Doom Emacs. We do have a config.org now because when I did that literate thing in the init.el, it created a config.org for us. But really, you have three config files. You have the init.el for the default Doom modules. You can turn them on and off. You have config.el, which is your personal config for whatever extra settings you want to add that go beyond the Doom modules. Then you have packages.el. Packages.el. Let me close this split. This is where you would install extra third-party packages that are not like the Doom default modules. And the way this works is you would go in here inside parentheses, and it is package exclamation point. It's like their own custom function, their own custom macro, and then name of package that you want to install. At least I believe that's the way it works. Again, I haven't used Doom in a while, but maybe I want to install, excuse me. What's a program I want to install? What I'm going to do, let me get back into my browser. I'm going to go to my .files config. Let me go to my old Doom Emacs config directory, packages.el. And these were some packages that I had installed. Here's a really easy one to install because it won't take very long. Beacon. All I need to do, :W to write, space HRR to restart Doom Emacs. It's going to install the Beacon package. A pretty small program, so it just takes a second. And now I should have Beacon available for me. I do. Beacon-mode turns on Beacon mode. And what this does is if I move the cursor around, it should give me a beacon. It kind of does. It's kind of hard to... Yeah. Not really seeing any kind of flashing. But I could turn that on in my personal config. Let me go back to config.el. And let me go down here at the end. Set Q. Beacon dash mode true. Kill the server and restart the server. Space FR, find recent files, go back to config.el. Now when I move the cursor around, I don't really get a flashy thingy like I should with the beacon. Is there more configuration I need to do? I can't remember. Go back and look at my old configs. Beacon mode should be set to 1 for true. Space HRR. Let me make sure it's actually turned on. That disabled beacon mode, so let me turn it back on. Anyway, the program is installed. Maybe I just don't know how. Yeah, think beacon only lights up between buffers or splits. It did show up when you tried to enable it. Yeah, I saw it flash that one time. But let me switch buffers. So buffer next or buffer previous. I guess I don't have any buffers open. Let's go to a new buffer. Yeah, now it flashes. You're right. Space buffer previous space BP. Well, it does flash between the different buffers, but I thought it would flash if you moved a certain distance in the document. I know I didn't imagine that. I know I did see it flash before when I moved the cursor with my mouse. It did when you scroll. Okay, maybe it is a scrolling thing. Yeah, it does. It does it when you scroll. Yep. Anyway, beacon. Neat little program. It really doesn't do anything. That's why I installed it. I knew it would just take a second to install. But that's just an example of how to use packages.el. So space FR, find recent files, packages.el. And of course from here you can install other Emacs packages, assuming you know the name of a package. For example, TLDR. I know there is a TLDR that's written in Emacs Lisp, for Emacs. Space HRR, reload Emacs, and install TLDR. Oh, it says error. Failed to reload your config. I wonder why it failed to reload my config. You know what? It probably doesn't like the fact that I did have that config.org. Since I'm not writing in org, let me just get rid of that just in case it is causing any kind of conflicts. Because if you do turn on the literate config, you really should configure Doom Emacs using config.org, not config.el. So now, let me get back into packages.el. Let's see if it installed TLDR for us. It did not. So space HRR. It can't find the package for TLDR. I know it's there because I have it in my GNU Emacs config. But maybe it's in a different repository than some of what they have enabled. But there's a million, of course, Emacs packages out there, of course. So that's your three main Doom configs. The init.el, where you turn on and off the default modules, very simple. It's just commenting out lines and uncommenting lines. Very easy to work with. Then there's the packages.el, where you install the third-party packages that are not part of the standard default modules for Doom. And then finally, you have config.el, which is your actual config file that you can get in here and play around with. You're going to have to learn a little bit about Emacs Lisp, which not the subject of today's video. Today, I just wanted to go through a basic install for those of you wanting to try it out. Obviously, you need to know Vim bindings. Let's cover very quickly some of the basic Vim bindings. You guys should know HJKL is your motion keys, right? So HJKL moves up, down, left, right. GG, first line of the document. Shift G, last line of the document. 5, capital G, the 5th line of the document. Managing splits, Control W, V for vertical. Control W, S for a horizontal split. Control W, W to move the cursor to the next frame. Control W, W to move the cursor to the next frame. Control W, C, close a window. Control W, C, close a window, close a frame. The buffers, space B, P for previous, space B, N for next, space B, I to get you to that I buffer, buffer there. Space BP for previous buffer. If you want to kill the buffer so it's actually closed and it's no longer open anymore, you can't come back to it, right? So, space BK to kill. And now if I go to space BI for iBuffer, I killed the packages.el buffer and it's no longer here. I could open it again, space FR, find recent files, packages.el. Now it's an open buffer again. Yeah, somebody is saying that they couldn't install TLDR on Garuda after Pacman-capital S TLDR. Yeah, it could be because they do have to pull packages down for TLDR from the actual TLDR repo as far as like the markdown files that actually give you the information. There could be an issue with the main TLDR package. That could be what was causing my issue as well then. Are you using Doom Emacs? Well, I installed Doom Emacs today. Whether I'll use it, there's no point in me switching to it. I already have a GNU Emacs config that basically does the same thing. I'd just be switching, just to be switching, for no real reason. I've switched many times. I started, when I first learned Emacs, I started with just GNU Emacs. And then I went to Doom Emacs, and then I went back to GNU Emacs, and then I went back to Doom Emacs. Now I'm on GNU Emacs, and even though I'm doing this Doom Emacs video today, even though switching between the two, I mean, I can live with either one. I can configure either one. The configuration for each is not that different, really. Obviously, Doom streamlines a lot of things with that init.el file for its default modules, and with the packages.el, it really makes it dead simple to install third-party packages. But your personal config file, the config.el, a lot of the kind of stuff you would do in a personal config, a personal Emacs config, the same commands you'd do in Doom Emacs, the same commands you'd write in a GNU Emacs config for the most part. It's very similar. So for me, I probably am not going to switch back. At least not right now. Just because it would take me at least a few minutes to get my Doom Emacs config back to where I want it, because I'd be missing some things from my GNU Emacs config, you know. It'd just be extra work on my part. But people have been wanting a video about Doom Emacs, and I thought, you know, we would get back into some Doom Emacs content today. I wanted to start at the very beginning, because really you need to know, after installation, you need to know those three main config files and what they do. Why aren't you using Spacemacs? I've used it and I think it's really good. I think Doom is a bit bloater. I don't know, bloater than Spacemacs. I've tried out Spacemacs. Doom is definitely faster than Spacemacs as far as this, at least in years past when I tried Spacemacs. It's definitely not bloated compared to Spacemacs, if that's what you were. Maybe bloat in terms of packages that you could or could not install. But here's the thing. If you're talking about packages that are installed as being bloat, go into your init.el, right? And turn on and off anything you don't use. As a matter of fact, most of the default packages are turned off. But if you did want to use any of this stuff, for whatever reason, just turn it off, right? So it can be as bloater as you want to get, if you take bloater seriously. Now I'm making fun of you mistyping. I couldn't help it. Are you learning any new programming languages? Was that to me? You know, the other day I was playing a little bit with creating a Flutter application because I thought it would be interesting. And of course, Flutter is written in a language called Dart. So I was learning a little bit of it, just the very basics. It's pretty easy language actually to wrap your head around. If you've played with any other programming languages, you know, the thing is, once you learn one language, they're all very similar. Like you can quickly pick up a new one. DT, is there a situation when you still use Vim? Absolutely. Sometimes I will use Vim on my machine if I'm already in a terminal. For example, if I know I'm going to be doing something in Emacs for a while, I'll just open up Emacs, and if I need a terminal, you know, I'll open up, for example, vterm here in Emacs, which I never did compile vterm. It's going to take a minute to compile, but I've got a terminal here in Emacs if I want to use it. You know, pretty much everything I want is in Emacs. But if for whatever reason I was in a terminal doing some command line stuff or whatever, you know, but instead of opening Emacs first and then navigating to a terminal, maybe I opened a terminal first. And I'm already in a terminal, then I'll, you know, open something in Vim rather than Emacs. Why? It's because if I'm in a terminal, I'll use a proper terminal program like Vim. I could use Emacs in the terminal, but Emacs in the terminal, I got to be honest, kind of sucks. The terminal version of Emacs is, I mean, it works. This is Emacs running in a terminal. You no longer have variable font sizes. You can't display images, you know, because the terminal can't display images. So it has those same limitations as Vim, you know, at that point. Now, if you want to use Emacs, chances are you want the full power of Emacs. So you want the actual GUI version of Emacs. But yeah, I often will find myself in Vim. If I'm doing a quick edit and I'm already in a terminal, or if I'm in a TTY, yeah, I'm just going to use Vim. A lot of times I'll end up in Vim, like if I SSH into some of my servers, you know, a remote server, you know, and just use Vim. The key bindings are the same between Vim and Emacs with evil mode. It's the same set of key bindings, so it's not like not like they're different in any real way. My English is very bad. I'm sorry if I wrote it wrong. You're good. Yeah, every language looks almost the same, but when I saw Haskell, my mind was just blown. Yeah, Haskell is different. Haskell has some really peculiar stuff to it. And to be honest, Emacs Lisp, or all the Lisp languages, all the Lisp variants, with all the parentheses, it's hard to wrap your mind sometimes around all those parentheses in Lisp. All right, guys. Well, that was all I wanted to do with Doom Emacs today. So if you want to try out Doom Emacs, try out Doom Emacs. I gave you a rough guide on how to install it. Ignored the first 30 minutes of today's stream because there were a lot of errors that were not Doom Emacs's fault. They were my fault. I had some old configs laying around on my system that caused us a lot of headaches in the first few minutes of the stream. But if you know the Vim bindings, try out Doom Emacs. I think you'll be impressed. It is a different kind of workflow. The reason people have trouble switching from Vim to Emacs is really more about the workflow. It's a different workflow, right? Because with Vim, you just kind of end up in Vim at some point. It's not like you start out in Vim. You're usually in a terminal, you're doing some shell commands or whatever it is you're doing, and at some point you end up in Vim, and then you do something in that text file, and then you quit out of Vim. You're back at the shell, right? And typically, if you're a Vim user, you start out in a shell, and then somewhere along the way, you end up in Vim. And what confuses the hell out of people, the Emacs workflow is totally different. You don't start out in a terminal. You don't start out in a shell, right? You start out just opening Emacs, right? From there, if you want a terminal, you go to the terminal, right? If you want a file manager, well, let me get out of this buffer. If you want a file manager, you just open a file manager in Vim, right? Or in Emacs, right? You open Emacs first, and from there you end up in your terminal and file manager and things. Eventually you'll end up editing text, of course, inside this. I want to click on the mouse. I don't know. Let's go to my Alacrity config. You'll end up in some config files, and when you're done, you'll end up wherever. All these buffers will stay open unless I kill them. So space BK to kill that buffer, space BK to kill that buffer, space BK to kill that buffer. I've had a lot of buffers open, but it's a different kind of workflow, right? And that's what confuses people. People are so used to that terminal workflow. I'm in a terminal, then I get into Vim, get out of Vim, I'm back in the terminal. Where in Emacs, your workflow should totally change. If you're going to be an Emacs user, no matter what you're doing on your computer, the very first thing you do is you launch Emacs. Because from that point, you can pretty much do all your work inside Emacs. You can use the bash shell or the fish shell, whatever shell you want to use, multiple shells. You can use the E shell, which is a shell written in Emacs Lisp for Emacs. You have your file manager built into Emacs. You have your multimedia players built into Emacs. You have your email client in Emacs, your IRC client. You have your Git client. It's a different kind of workflow, and for many people, that is what really frustrates them because they try to use Emacs the way they were using the terminal/Vim, and it doesn't feel right to them. So, couple more questions, and I'm going to get out of here. Let me get back to the chat, see what you guys have to say here. DT, have you ever used choose instead of awk? Used choose instead of awk. I'm assuming that's a command, the choose command. I've never heard of it. But awk, I like awk. I know how to use awk, so awk's great. DT, knowing Haskell puts you in a great spot among all programmers. Well, I'm not really a programmer. I'm not trying to make money. I really don't like programming. I like programming in spots, in spurts. Like every couple of months, every 2-3 months, I'll get a hankering to write something. Either write something, script something in Bash or Python, or write a proper program in something like Haskell, or write my own GTK program, Qt programming, using whatever language I happen to want to play around in at that time. But I'll do it for a few hours over a couple of days, and then I'll realize, I don't really feel like doing this anymore. I won't do it anymore. You know, I really, you know, I'm not, I just, I'm not a programmer at heart. Not something I want to do. I like knowing a little bit about this stuff because I like knowing how a lot of this stuff on my Linux machine works. So that's nice, you know. I like knowing how to create a GTK app, even though I don't want to really create one. I like knowing how to create a Qt app, even though I really don't want to create one myself. You know. Yeah, choose as a rewrite of Walk. Oh, let me guess. In Rust, it's probably what it's going to be. Pale Night looks pretty nice on your desk. Yeah, I actually knew what that color scheme was because I've used it before. And Pale Night is actually a really nice color scheme. Haven't used it in many years, but I would say 7 or 8 years ago, it was my color scheme of choice. Used it in all my terminals. My Vim color scheme was Pale Night. Yeah, it's a nice one. These days, I gotta say, I do like Dark 1 or Doom 1, which is the default theme in Doom. Let's go ahead and switch back to, what am I doing? Space HT for theme. Doom 1. I gotta say, you know, the Doom 1 theme, which is really just the Dark 1 theme, it was the default color scheme for Atom, you know. It is, you know, I'm gonna try to find something kind of colorful. But, you know, this is a nice color scheme. I navigate to something that's gonna have some proper syntax. There's my bash config, my bash RC, you know. It's easy on the eyes. It's nice. It's got some contrast, which, you know, as you get older, you know, you prefer things that have a little more contrast, really low contrast themes. So something like Nord, for example. I know a lot of people like Nord. I can't stand it. It does not have enough contrast. Let's see. DT. Be looking younger with each video. Okay, way to stay healthy at your age. I don't know if I stay that healthy. I try to stay in reasonable shape, though. I try to hit the gym about 4 or 5 times every week, you know, for about an hour or so. Lift some weights, do an occasional cardio. Been doing that for a number of years, mainly just to stay active, because otherwise, you know, sitting here in front of this computer, you know, I really wouldn't do much. But, you know, I definitely, I can say, you know, you'll find this out, those of you that are younger, you know, when you were in school, like when I was in high school, in college, and now I see some of those same people that I went to school with. You know, we're all, you know, nearly 50 years old now, and I see some of them and they can barely get around. They just look older than they are. Some of them look 10, 15 years older than what they actually are, and they just look like they've had a rough life. And I don't want to be like that, right? I want to be able to still get around and be active and look like I'm enjoying life instead of like I'm just struggling and getting by. Yeah, it's easy to slack off. Yeah, the older we get, I'm 35 and starting to slow down. Yeah. Every now and then I can feel it. You know, every now and then I'll have those days where it's like all of a sudden I was like, man, I don't feel like I can do anything today. You know, you'll have those days that hit you. You know, my friend is 23 and doesn't want to walk. What? I know people like that. They try to minimize the amount of walking they do. The people that when they go to the store, they go somewhere like a Walmart or a Target, you know, they're going to circle the parking lot hoping to finally get like the parking spot closest to the door, because they can't park at a parking spot, you know, 30 feet a little further down because they don't want to have to walk in that distance. And it's very strange. All right, guys, I'm going to get out of here. Guys, take care. Peace. Before I go, I am going to show some cards for the patrons. I want to thank these guys, all these names we're seeing. Other than that, let's do one of these again sometime soon. I don't know when I'll schedule the next stream, but I'll catch up with you guys real soon. Peace, guys.